if I just interject on something she said, something that we look at, like if we're dealing with somebody on the street, and this is something maybe you know what I mean, that consumers should be aware of as well. Try not to make movements into the pockets real quick, because we're trained that hands kill, and what happens is, if I'm talking to somebody on the street, and all of a sudden they're going to go into their pockets and stuff, I'm going to ask them, please, you know, remove your hands from your pocket if you don't mind while you're talking to me. And then when that person is going back in those pockets again, after I've already told them, more than likely I'm going to perform a pat down at that time, because that's hands are going to kill, and the person's not, you know what I mean? So it's not a bad idea to recommend that for those of you in the, you know, the mental health field, to the people that you deal with. If they're ever stopped, hiding hands and stuff are going to really alert us, and that's what we're really. And the same thing, even like on a traffic stop, if you don't mind. I know that's one of the
sure.
One of the meatballs you threw at me here, but anyway, even like on a traffic stop, it's important too. If a car is stopped, don't start immediately reaching for your registration and insurance and your driver's license stuff. Just wait for the officer to come up to the car, and that's all. Just put your hands on top of the steering wheel in a normal position, because what happens is a lot of times, and it's normal for people to stop and start going through their stuff, but we're really concerned at that point, because are they just reaching for the registration, or are they reaching for something or hiding something in that car we should be aware of? So I encourage people, if you're ever stopped by the police, you know, just sit tight normally, and like Mark said, let the legal course play its action. Your best bet is to, if you're innocent of the crime and stuff, just let the course play its action instead of getting argumentative and stuff.
I'm wondering again about family members and what they do in this process, and what they can do, and what their rights are in this process. So someone's arrested, they found out that their family member, an individual who has mental illness, is now arrested. They've been brought for processing, and now they're in the system, and who can they turn to? Should their first call be to an attorney? Are the cops going to bounce into the DAs, and is there going to be back and forth there? Where can a person find answers about an arrest once it's taken place? Who's the best person they should talk to? And I'm going to open that up to any of our panelists here.
If you want me to start it off, we get a lot of calls, like initially, as soon as we take somebody into custody. Do you have so-and-so? Do you have so-and-so? And we don't initially release that information right then and there. Now, if there's let's say we take somebody into custody who has a mental illness, it would probably, if they're going to take the time to call the desk, the Scranton Police desk, and ask the question if the person has been arrested, and it's a family member who maybe knows the person was arrested and that person has a mental illness, maybe they should suggest, you know, can I talk to the supervisor that's working right now? And explain to the supervisor that this person needs medication, or this person, you know what I mean? So that way, because our policies in our department is we don't release the information initially. The processing center, by the time they get over there before they go to the magistrates, is around the time that they'll be able to make their first phone call. So,
and I just want to point out, just so we don't lose sight of this. From our point of view, when it comes to the police and when it comes to the prosecution in the case, we're not normally privy to information such as mental illnesses, competency, things of that nature. The reason being is because we have to prove our cases on our own. I mean, we have to stand alone and acquire information that is germane to the case itself. Questions of mental illness and competency don't come till later on down the road for good reasons. That's information that the person has themselves. It's very unlikely a situation where a prosecution will go for somebody's mental health records or their medical records, because that's information that generally the defense wants to provide to the Commonwealth, because they want to show that this individual is not competent to proceed to trial. They want to show that the mental illness is a mitigating factor at time of sentencing. So this information, although the police may be trained at its inception to identify these things, at least within Scranton City, although they're being trained to identify and how to respond to these situations, that concrete information that's stored away in counseling notes or some part of their diagnosis is not presented to us. And we're not really, I can't even think of a case that I've had where I've said, I need to go get this defendant's medical records to prove my case. It's generally information that's passed on at some point from the defense for those reasons. We will, however, look to get medical records from, obviously, the victims and their witnesses, but those are things that we do to build up our case. We don't necessarily pry into the defendant's life, and necessarily, I don't know that we'd be able to in a lot of circumstances. And we can file subpoenas to get that information, but defense counsel would probably file a motion to quash and require that we show some reason why we're subpoenaing that record. And even if we did something else in the way of petitioning the court, I'm sure the court would have questions why it's necessary for us to prove our case to go dabbling in somebody's mental health records.
Ken?
At this point now, we have actually 2 probation officers in the courthouse that are going through all this stuff, and we're trying to address issues after the preliminary hearing, whereas in the past, like Mark just said, no one knew what was going on. So whether it's calling the client in, having them sign releases, this way by the time it gets to the higher courts, everyone has a generalization on hopefully substance abuse, mental health illness, where in the past it wasn't that way. They're trying to address it basically right after the arrest. We're getting information on past legal history, whatever they can.
So it's a comprehensive history about that individual, services that they may have received, priors obviously, and things of that nature if they're engaged in services currently.
Right. And this is new too, Judge, in the last 6 months or so that they started that?
Yeah, but something else that ties in with this, and Chief Duffy mentioned earlier about central booking, and that's a relatively new innovation in Lackawanna County, and that is that has been established in the basement of the courthouse that when an arrest is made any place in the county, as the chief indicated, first they might be questioned, they're detained, but in order to be processed, they are now brought to this central booking agency right within the basement of the courthouse that is fully staffed 24/7, and they're police officers who receive that person that's been arrested and start processing them. At that point, but we are trying to coordinate all of the records so that at central booking, when they hit the computer about this person who had just been brought in, ultimately the officer on duty there is going to have access to the fact that yes, this person has not only a prior criminal record, but this person may also have cases pending in domestic court, in family court. There may be a PFA against them. The children and youth records, we've been trying to tie that in, but there are some real issues of privacy, whether or not there might be any cases pending in the family court area. And frequently, these areas pop up as being a red flag, if not saying there is a mental health history here. The experienced investigator and person at the desk going to say, whoa, there might be some mental health issues here, and now can start asking the right questions.
Ken?
Well, if I can, I think the one thing that so far I don't think anyone's really touched on that I think is important for people to know here who either have mental health issues or are here because someone they love has them. Just because you're charged with a crime doesn't mean your privacy for your mental health issues goes out the window. The treatment courts are all held behind closed doors. When we get records, we can't disclose them unless our client gives us the authorization to disclose them. And I have yet to see a case, and I'm coming up on 7 years, I'll be practicing with the PD's office. Before that, I was with the DA's office, where someone's mental health did come in at trial, as Mark alluded to. So I don't want anyone sitting here thinking, well, wow, if I get charged with a crime or someone I know gets charged with a crime, their mental health history is going to be made a public record. It's not. There are steps taken to make sure it does stay quiet and confidential. All of the treatment teams are bound by confidentiality, and with the exception of disclosing to the courts what's going on, no one else is really going to know. But I just don't want any people sitting here thinking, wow, if I ever get charged, my entire life is going to be an open book for every person to find out, because that's not the case.
Thank you. I think that's an excellent point to make. I have a question, Chief, you alluded to it, about medications. And can a person's medications go with them once they're arrested? And Denny, maybe you can answer what happens at the jail. Can a person's medications go with them when they end up in county prison?
Well, we would, like police-wise, our policy is we would never, we cannot give medication to the person. If we have it, we put it into their property. The property then goes to the processing center, and then eventually, if they do end up in the prison, it'll end up over there with them. And that's where they have a nurse's staff and so on. So we would never administer medication or allow a person to consume any medication in front of us.
But a family member or an individual could give it to you. And if a person's arrested and they're going to jail, that individual can give you that person's medications to go with them.
Yes, they can. However, will it be accepted into the jail depending?
Probably not.
Right. So they can now.
Right.
But, the thing I can suggest is always, if there's any uncertainty, always ask to talk to the supervisor. I put a lot of responsibility on my supervisors because I want them to make the decisions. And there may be a case where this person may need this medication. And if that's the case, we're going to get that person on board with an area hospital or something to make sure it's administered. But we, too, have policies where I'm sorry, we have officers who are out there that know the prison is not going to take them in, so they're going to say, no, we're not going to accept that medication. But there may be a unique circumstance, and that's why I suggest to people, if there is that unique circumstance, let's get a supervisor involved to make that decision.
Okay.
The prison may accept the medication, but they'll just hold it. They will not use it because they don't know if it's been tainted with. So what normally would happen is that a nurse sees somebody when they come into the prison. They may be presented with the medication that was brought with them, or if they don't have it with them, the consumer may say, this is the medication I'm on. And then it's a process of trying to find out if they're giving you the correct information on the medication. So they would either try the drugstore, or if they couldn't find it out that way through the doctor, I'd check records either at Strand Counseling Center or up at NHS, make a phone call, find out what the medications are. Now, one of the big problems with the prison, as in many hospitals that you would go to now, is there's a medication protocol that's used. And so you may be on one medication that is not used by the prison. So you would be then, once we find out what that medication is, the psychiatrist would order a medication that would be comparable to that, but not necessarily the same medication.
And who sets that criteria of medication at the prison of what is going to be used and what's not?
The medical provider who bids on the contract.
Okay. Kenny, did you have something?
I was just going to touch on from my experience of bringing people to prison is that their family member write down their medication. Yeah, get like nervous. Medication. This way, when you present it to the nurse, she'll know what pharmacy to use, and you'll take away some time there instead of calling a million different pharmacies. If they know exactly where they're getting their scripts filled, it's easier to let the people know so they're taking their meds when they do it instead of bouncing around and trying to figure it out.
It's not uncommon for my staff to get a call from family members who realize that I may have sent that person to jail, and the family member's calling in and saying, you know, he was on this medication or that or whatever. And that's, again, Dennis becomes so invaluable. I pick up the phone and I call him. I told this guy was on this, that, and that. Should he be on anything, have somebody look at him, and it's instantaneous. It's done. We don't ignore somebody who's in jail when we are aware that there are problems.
Yeah.
Yes, I wanted to ask the man at the prison, is there any prison protocol for people entering that need medication? Is there any time frame in which that prisoner sees the nurse? Is there like a 24-hour period?
They see the nurse immediately upon entering the prison. One of the first things that's done is they're medically cleared by a nurse as they're brought into the prison. The nurse has to accept them at the prison. If they find something that's medical, that they don't feel the person is stable, they can actually refuse and have the person sent to an emergency room before they accept the person into the prison.
So a nurse is on call 24 hours at the prison?
There are nurses on every shift, yes.
I want to step back for a second because we've been speaking in generalities about individuals who have a mental illness. And I want to ask this specifically to our panelists on the resource panel. To kind of talk about the differences when we say mental illness. That just isn't one singular term. There's a lot of different aspects and areas of mental illness. And I'm wondering if our resource panel can provide us with some information about the differences there and how someone with schizophrenia may react differently than someone with bipolar when they're interacting with police or when they're talking to a public defender or when they're in front of a judge. I'm just wondering if we can get a little bit of a breakdown that kind of spotlights the variations of mental illness. Anyone from our resource panel can feel free.